playing 2D games in VR sounds completely pointless until you actually try it. In 2017, I got both the game Hollow Knight and an HTC virtual reality headset. I was obsessed with both. I had to try them at the same time. I assumed this would be a dumb gimmick that'd be fun for about 5 minutes, but I loved it. I played Hollow Knight in virtual reality for hundreds of hours. It took me a while to figure out why I liked it so much, but it boils down to 4 major improvements. 1. Lack of screen glare. The colors and contrast look so much better than on my TV. Plus, I didn't have to fidget with color and brightness settings based on where the sun was hitting the TV that day. 2. Responsiveness. VR headsets respond way faster than basic TVs, and I can crank the frame rate to 144 frames per second, which feels amazing. 3. It bugged my girlfriend and roommates less. Don't get me wrong, but every week or two, they were happy to sit next to me on a couch and cheer me on, but sometimes we wanted to do separate things. 4. I could put the screens anywhere. A screen above my head because my neck is hurting and I want to lay down. Sure. Another virtual screen to show my guides, notes, chat window, streaming and recording controls. Done. It was so close to perfect. One thing kept bugging me. The game itself is two-dimensional. The background layers move slower than the foreground layers to give an illusion of 3D depth called parallax. This seems fine on a TV, but feels wrong when you're in a 3D virtual environment. In my dreams, the game was 3D. In reality, Hollow Knight pretends to have depth using layered backgrounds, and on a normal screen, the illusion works great. But in virtual reality, your brain immediately notices the layers are not actually in three-dimensional space, and it just feels wrong. So I started experimenting with separating the game's rendering layers into actual physical depth inside of virtual reality. That was better, but it slowed the game down. It was incredibly technically demanding. The software I wrote grabs each layer one at a time as they're drawn. Next, it drops each onto a rectangle in the VR space that I could walk around and look inside. Conceptually, it was simple. Technically, it was a nightmare. I had to render at least 7 layers of the game isometrically, then render them twice in actual 3D, once for each eye, including transparency and lighting. And I had to do all of that 90 times per second to make the VR experience fluid. The prototype barely worked, but it worked well enough to help land me a VR developer job. Also, in the process of trying to get it to run better, I ended up totally cooking my GTX 1060. In the meantime, this project was abandoned on a dead PC that I never got around to fixing, and I forgot all about it. Until 8 years later, 2025, New Year's Eve. While I was chatting with friends about Silk Song and various VR games and projects, I got the bug to try it again, now with improved skills and tools. And this time, it worked just as bad, at first. But I continued to optimize and improve the software, rather than trying to overclock the hardware. I had to think less like a hacker or a modder, and more like a rendering pipeline engineer. Optimization and frame timing became incredibly important. By the end of January, it was playable. By February, Hollow Knight ran well enough for me to complete my first ever Steel Soul run, and by March, my Silk Song experience was in every way better in VR than on any TV screen, even just running off of a laptop. And that leads me to my 5th improvement, immersion. In VR, Hollow Knight stopped feeling like layers on a screen. The environment... Check. All right, we're going to do a quick sync point. Back to point 5. And that leads me to my 5th improvement, immersion. In VR, Hollow Knight stopped feeling like layers on a screen. The environments felt physically real. My eyes naturally focused on the foreground, background, lighting, motion in the same way that they would in a real place. All right, we're going to try 5 one last time. Slate again. All right, point 5, take 3. And that leads me to my 5th improvement, immersion. In VR, Hollow Knight stopped feeling like layers on a screen. The environments felt physically real. My eyes naturally focused on the foreground, background, lighting, and motion in the same way that they would in a real place. For the first time, it was no longer a game I was looking at. It was a place I was inside. I gained a much deeper appreciation for the game's art and world building, and the feedback from playtesters has been overwhelmingly similar. Along the way, I've made a handful of other mods, because any other changes I wanted to make to these games at this point kind of seemed laughably easy by comparison, honestly. After a few months of iteration, as of April 7th of this year, 2026, the project has over 1,000 users with no reported crashes so far, which still surprises me, considering how experimental the original idea was. After hundreds of hours of testing this, I honestly believe certain 2D games are dramatically improved in virtual reality. Try it, and tell me what game should be next. Thanks.